Creepy Uncle Joe has thrown his hair plugs into the fray, making it 21 candidates running for president in 2020. President Trump makes another brilliant move in Indianapolis. The leftist candidates do themselves no favors in their town halls this past week, and Avengers Endgame hits theaters, and I will give you my non-spoilery take. I'm Big E, and this is the Liberty Cast. So creepy Uncle Joe Biden has announced his candidacy. He did this on Thursday in a very bizarre video announcement. I guess third time's a charm. But the announcement video is just, like I said, it's bizarre. He said some things in there that were patently ridiculous, just flat out lies.
Charlottesville, Virginia is home to the author of one of the great documents in human history. We know it by heart. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights. We've heard it so often, it's almost a cliche, but it's who we are.
We've heard it so often, it's almost a cliche. This guy is an idiot. There's nothing cliche about the Declaration of Independence. And there's nothing cliche about acknowledging that we are all endowed by our creator with certain inalienable rights. I mean, what? And for a guy who aspires to be president to suggest that one of the most important documents in this country's history is banal or some sort of platitude that's lost its meaning, kind of like racist. But it shows a shocking, even for the left, lack of self-awareness. But then he went on to talk about Charlottesville and something President Trump said in the aftermath of that. He claims that Trump said that there were fine people on both sides. Well, let me rephrase. I shouldn't say that he claimed that's what he said, because those words in that particular order did actually come out of the president's mouth. But context is key. Listen to this.
Neo-Nazis started this. They showed up in Charlottesville. They showed up in Charlottesville to protest.
Excuse me. They didn't put themselves down as neo, and you had some very bad people in that group. But you also had people that were very fine people on both sides. You had people in that group. Excuse me. I saw the same pictures as you did. You had people in that group that were there to protest the taking down of, to them, a very, very important statue and the renaming of a park from Robert E. Lee to another name. So you know what? It's fine. You're changing history, you're changing culture, and you had people, and I'm not talking about the neo-Nazis and the white nationalists, because they should be condemned totally. But you had many people in that group other than neo-Nazis and white nationalists, okay? And the press has treated them absolutely unfairly.
Now, when I first heard about the remarks that Trump made, I figured it was just another one of his inartful turns of phrase and that he didn't actually mean that. But it turns out he didn't mean it, because that's not what he said. What he was trying to say while being interrupted by these so-called journalists was that there were peaceful protesters on both sides before the extremist groups like Antifa and the neo-Nazis and the white supremacists. Before they showed up, he was calling those people fine people. Fine people who had opposing views, and there's nothing wrong with that. I have lifelong friends with whom I disagree on just about everything politically. We can sit down and have some good whiskey and a fine cigar and talk about it and argue and agree to disagree and keep it moving. I'm not trying to insinuate that I'm a fine person or anything. I'll let others make that determination one way or the other. But I say that to express that people can disagree without being disagreeable. You see what I did there? Now that is almost a cliche. So there's creepy Uncle Joe kicking off his campaign with a gaffe and a lie right from the jump in under a minute and a half at the beginning of his announcement video. I will say, though, the one thing that he did get right is that we are in a battle for the soul of this nation. I didn't play that clip that comes later, but he actually does say that. Obama said that he wanted to fundamentally transform this country. I actually think that he's been marginally successful in that endeavor. I mean, let's examine that for a second. Before he took office, there were no movements on college campuses to have segregated dorms. People had largely moved beyond racism. I'm not saying there were no racists. I'm not saying there wasn't racism, but I'm saying that it was largely in the past. But for the most part, I think we moved beyond racism and indulging in those racist stereotypes. There was no war on the police. Bernie Sanders was still a fringe candidate that no one could take seriously. He used to be a footnote, but now he's helped drive the left's agenda, so much so that he's now not far left enough for what has become the mainstream of the left and the Democrat Socialists of America. And let's be honest, they're not socialists, they're communists, if we're going to be honest about it. But I would say that that's a fundamental change that is at the very least underway, if it's not complete. But Joe's going to try and stake a claim to the centrist mantle. Lunch Bucket Joe, as he's often called. He may have been a centrist 30 years ago, 40 years ago when he was getting started, but no more. He managed to raise $6.3 million in the first 24 hours after he announced. That's the largest first day total of any of the candidates so far. But only 96,000 people donated, as opposed to Sanders, who had 225,000 people donate and contribute to his $6.1 million first day haul. Biden has some people with some serious money donating to his campaign. And not only that, but he held a fundraiser where the admission was $2,800 a head. So I mean, he's got the money, he's got the financial backing. I think it's Biden's race to lose. He's ahead in the polls. As soon as he announced, he was ahead of President Trump by 8 points. That doesn't mean anything. Hillary Clinton was way up in the polls in the beginning of that campaign, and we see how that worked out. But I think this is Biden's race to lose for now. But he is more than capable of losing it. Now, obviously, I'm referring to the primary. Whoever they run, whoever gets the nomination for the Democrats, is going to have a tough time beating President Trump unless something catastrophic happens with the economy. And I'm not going to get into it today, but we did have some really good economic news come down. So Biden's going to have to work really hard to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory of this primary, especially with the press on his side, with the media on his side. Or is the media on his side? I don't know. Let's examine that for a second. As you no doubt heard, there was a series of town hall meetings over at CNN last week, and you had the likes of Kamala Harris, Joe Biden, Elizabeth Warren, Pete Buttigieg, and Amy Klobuchar all participating, not all together, they each held separate ones. And as you also heard, they dropped some bombs of some really ridiculous nonsense. And I'm not going to talk about all of them, but I am going to get into a few of them and talk about some of the things that they said. But I can only imagine how much more material we would have if creepy Uncle Joe would have gotten into the race sooner and been at that town hall on Monday. Let's start with the guy who creepy Uncle Joe supplanted as the front runner in this primary, Comrade Sanders.
Here is my view. If somebody commits a serious crime, sexual assault, murder, they're going to be punished. They may be in jail for 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, their whole lives. That's what happens when you commit a serious crime. But I think the right to vote is inherent to our democracy. Yes, even for terrible people. Because once you start chipping away and you say, well, that guy committed a terrible crime, not going to let him vote. Or that person did that, not going to let that person vote. You're running down a slippery slope. So I believe that people who commit crimes, they pay the price. When they get out of jail, I believe they certainly should have the right to vote. But I do believe that even if they are in jail, they're paying their price to society, but that should not take away their inherent American right to participate in our democracy.
Applause for the answer. My follow-up question goes to this being like you're writing an opposition ad against you by saying you think the Boston Marathon bomber should vote not after he pays his debt to society, but while he's in jail. You sure about that?
Well, Chris, I think I have written many 30-second opposition ads throughout my life. This will be just another one. But I do believe, look, you know, this is what I believe. Do you believe in democracy? Do you believe that every single American 18 years of age or older who's an American citizen has the right to vote?
That was a pretty long clip, and I left off the question because the woman asking was meandering a bit, and it didn't. We got you got from the answer what her question was, and she did specifically mention the Boston Marathon bomber, murderers, rapists, and the like. And he went on to spout some nonsense about Republican governors trying to suppress the votes of minorities and young people and things like blah blah blah. Same tired talking points that they've been yammering about for years. But here's the thing. When you commit a crime, especially a crime like rape, murder, terrorism, you belong in prison. And what you have done in those cases is taken away someone else's rights. So when you take away someone else's rights, you give up yours. It's a consequence of committing that crime. You don't get the right to walk freely in society. You don't get to keep the right to engage. And personally, I think that if you get convicted of first-degree murder, you go to the electric chair or the gallows or the firing squad. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. You're done. You took away someone else's life. You give up yours. But beyond that, why would you want to give criminals the right to engage in our democracy such that their vote could influence policies that directly affect their sentences? If someone in jail is convicted of armed robbery or assault and battery with a deadly weapon, to wit, a firearm, most likely obtained illegally, by the way, do you think they're going to vote for a candidate who's tough on crime? The guy who wants people who commit crimes with guns sentenced more harshly than someone who committed a crime without using a firearm? Of course not. He's going to vote for the bleeding heart leftist who thinks that crime is society's fault, and the perpetrator accused of said crime was failed by the system and deserves a second chance. I mean, the whole prospect is utterly ridiculous. And those idiots in the crowd applauded. But what I was not expecting was Chris Cuomo's response. In a rare moment of lucidity, he actually pushed back on Sanders a bit and gave him a chance to walk back. But as you heard in the clip, he doubled down. But that brings us to Kamala Harris. You know what? Let's deal with her ridiculousness after a short break. And we'll see you on the other side. Now, in Kamala Harris's town hall, because these were held separately. So in her town hall, she was asked about gun control. And obviously, this is a town hall on CNN, so of course gun control is coming up. But here's part of her response.
But we need reasonable gun safety laws in this country, starting with universal background checks and a renewal of the assault weapon ban. But they have failed to have the courage to act. So, Ben, here's my response to you. Upon being elected, I will give the United States Congress 100 days to get their act together and have the courage to pass reasonable gun safety laws. And if they fail to do it, then I will take executive action. And specifically what I will do is put in place a requirement that for anyone who sells more than 5 guns a year, they are required to do background checks when they sell those guns. I will require that for any gun dealer that breaks the law, the ATF take their license. And by the way, ATF, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms. Well, the ATF has been doing a lot of the A and the T, but not much of the F. And we need to fix that. And then on the third piece, because none of us have been sleeping over the last 2 years, part of what has happened under the current administration is they took fugitives off the list of prohibited people. I put them back on the list, meaning that fugitives from justice should not be able to purchase a handgun or any kind of weapon. So that's what I do.
My goodness, she's a piece of work, isn't she? I mean, there was nothing really new there except for a few new lies. Well, maybe old, just recycled lies, I guess. But this one's a doozy because whenever a gun dealer breaks the law, whether it's not performing background checks or doing something with their records, the ATF does revoke their license. So that was just ridiculous. But she's proposing to take guns away from law-abiding citizens because the background checks, which are already done, that she's proposing, don't catch everything. But they don't catch everything because some law enforcement agencies are not doing their jobs. Sheriff Scott Israel in Broward County, Florida comes to mind. The FBI in Florida, who got tips about the Parkland shooter, also come to mind. The Air Force, of whom I'm a veteran. But the Air Force didn't do their job, and the Sutherland Springs shooter was able to get his guns. Don't punish the citizens. Hold the shooters and the authorities who dropped the ball that allowed the shooters to get those guns. Hold them accountable. But why does no one ever ask these people how taking these guns away from people like you and me will in any way stop scumbags from getting their hands on guns? All it will do is make us vulnerable to the predators. And what did she mean with that crack about the ATF not doing much of the F? What did that even mean? I mean, she's just ridiculous. And then, oh my goodness, I could not let this go without addressing this. At the end of that, she said that the Trump administration took 500,000 fugitives off of the NICS list so that they wouldn't show up if they went to go try to purchase a firearm. They wouldn't show up as a prohibited possessor in the background check. That is a bold-faced lie. 500,000 fugitives did come off of that list, but it was not the Trump administration that did it. It was the Obama administration. These people, it's like lying is like breathing to them. And she knew that. There is no way she did not know that. No way. But she said it anyway. I spent more time on her than I really wanted to, but there was one other thing that she said that I really want to talk about. She was just on fire with all kinds of ridiculousness. But there is one thing that I wanted to make sure I talked about, and it was a follow-up to Bernie Sanders and his ridiculous notion of allowing felons to vote.
This is a quote. "The right to vote is inherent to our democracy, yes, even for terrible people." Do you agree with that, Senator?
I agree that the right to vote is one of the very important components of citizenship. And it is something that people should not be stripped of, needlessly, which is why I have been long an advocate of making sure that the formerly incarcerated are not denied a right to vote, which is the case in so many states in our country. In some states, permanently deprived of the right to vote. And these are policies that go back to Jim Crow. These are policies that go back to the heart of policies that have been about disenfranchisement, policies that continue until today, and we need to take it seriously.
But people who are convicted in prison, like the Boston Marathon bomber, on death row, people who are convicted of sexual assault, they should be able to vote?
I think we should have that conversation.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Now, it's not as obvious from this audio as Cuomo's was, but Don Lemon seemed pretty skeptical about that non-answer answer. And the look on her face, if you look at the video, shows that she realized that she blew it on that one. And of course, she walked it back the next day.
We right now have got a lot of work to do with the people in our country who have served their time and have been prohibited from voting. But, you know, do I think that people who commit murder, people who are terrorists, should be deprived of their rights? Yeah, I do. I'm a prosecutor. I believe that in terms of there has to be serious consequence for the most extreme types of crimes.
Whoa, that is a complete 180 from what she said less than 24 hours prior. Now, if she had said that to Don Lemon at the town hall, it would have been completely different. Now, I'm of the camp that once you're convicted of a violent felony, you give up your right to vote, period. I get the argument that once you've paid your debt to society, your rights as a citizen should be fully restored. But that doesn't hold any water with me, because do you really think that they would include the Second Amendment in that restoration of rights? Of course they wouldn't. They want to take that right away from those of us who haven't committed any crimes. But let me circle back real quick to a point I was starting to make earlier. Now, I started that by asking whether or not the press, the media, was going to be on Joe Biden's side. Based on this town hall, I know it's only one event, but CNN at least seems a little more skeptical, a little more, they're willing to push back a little more on some of the more radical ideas that the left is coming up with. So if Joe sticks with his centrist mentality, maybe. But I also think they're only going to push back, but so much. They're still going to back whoever is running against President Trump. But anyway, let's move on, because there's a couple of other things I want to get to. I wanted to talk about Pete Buttigieg. I wanted to talk about something else that Kamala Harris said, but I rambled on too long. But I really want to get to these other two things. So moving on. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Now, the NRA annual meetings are taking place this weekend. We went last year when they were in Dallas, and I'm really bummed that I didn't get a chance to go this year, because it was a good time. But this year would have been absolutely amazing, because I would have loved to have been there to hear this.
Under my administration, we will never surrender American sovereignty to anyone. We will never allow foreign bureaucrats to trample on your Second Amendment freedom. And that is why my administration will never ratify the UN Arms Trade Treaty. I hope you're happy. And I am officially announcing today that the United States will be revoking the effect of America's signature from this badly misguided treatment. We're taking our signature back. The United Nations will soon receive a formal notice that America is rejecting this treaty. As part of this decision, I will sign right now, in front of a lot of witnesses, a lot of witnesses, a message asking the Senate to discontinue the treaty ratification process and to return the now rejected treaty right back to me in the Oval Office, where I will dispose of it.
Well, that is a far cry from Obama's last speech at the UN, where he said that giving up freedom and binding ourselves to international rules over the long term enhances our security. Come on. I will take Donald Trump's brashness over that tripe any day. Now, for those of you who are not familiar, the UN Arms Trade Treaty basically forces any countries party to the agreement to create legislation regulating the import and export of all categories of weapons, from tanks, helicopters, ships, missile launchers, down to rifles and handguns and the attendant ammunition, to all of that. And that legislation is submitted to a secretary at the UN who oversees the enforcement of this legislation, which means this UN secretary bureaucrat could come and inspect any import and export records, and this person would have access to the names of individuals or entities that were handling the import and export of these weapons. The fact that any president of this country would agree to such a thing is abhorrent. And I am stoked that President Trump is rejecting this madness. Okay, two more quick things before we get you out of here. Rhode Island is taking a novel approach to doing something about mass school shootings. The Rhode Island House of Representatives has approved a bill requiring school districts to establish threat assessment teams to try and identify students who may be exhibiting signs that they may become violent. I think this is a step in the right direction. Now, it's not perfect. I do see some potential issues. I can see a quiet kid or a kid who may exhibit signs but really doesn't have any violent tendencies getting caught up in the system and being labeled dangerous even though they're not. But as long as it's well thought out and there are mechanisms for any student who's evaluated and found to not be dangerous, doesn't get a permanent mark on their record, which could harm their ability to exercise their Second Amendment rights as an adult, or any harms them in any other capacity, whether it's getting into school or getting a job or anything like that. I just want to make sure that that is addressed in the implementation of this. But although it's not perfect, it's far better than the alternative, which really does nothing but make more people targets. Okay, last thing real quick before we get you out of here.
Nerd alert!
Yes, I went and saw Avengers Endgame today. It was epic. It was a wild ride that honestly, you don't even really need to have seen the previous 21 films to appreciate it or enjoy it. It's that self-contained. I'm not going to go on too much about it now because this is the opening weekend, and I know that a lot of people either couldn't get tickets or didn't want to brave the crowds, which is usually my take on things when it comes to these blockbusters. I'll wait a couple of weeks. I don't think we saw Captain Marvel for a month, but the opportunity presented itself, so we took it, and I'm glad we did. Now, if you follow the MCU like I do, then I'll tell you that it was a fitting end to the arc that they're now calling the Infinity Saga. It had everything. It had humor. It had some sad moments. It had some holy crap, that just happened moments. It had some holy crap, what just happened moments. And they do a fantastic job of setting up the future of the MCU. Now, if you don't follow these movies like I and the rest of the nerds do, but still enjoy movies that run the gamut from thriller to drama to action, then you should definitely check it out. Either next week or the week after, I'll review it with spoilers. I mean, it's already smashed the record for the highest opening weekend of all time and will most likely smash all kinds of records, including how quickly it smashes said records. So I imagine that everyone who's going to see it will have seen it or already been exposed to spoilers by the time I review it. So there's that. All right, folks, that's our show. Thank you for listening. I really appreciate it. We ran short last week, and this week we ran long, and I still didn't get to everything I wanted to touch on. So I'll either be posting about that in the blog, or maybe I'll do some short videos this week. But I appreciate you listening. Thank you. But please subscribe, leave a review. You can find us on iTunes, Spreaker, Spotify, iHeartRadio, a ton of other popular podcast platforms. And I can also be found on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. It's The Liberty Cast on all 3 platforms. I look forward to hearing from you. But until next time, keep your head on a swivel and stay safe, everybody.